Well, we're about ready to start our show, but we're really not interested. It's President-elect Moloch on the phone. Well, you're watching, so you know we have the book up. We know, we have our revolution. We know we have the guy that would have whumped you back in November had he been the candidate. But he says he's got plans.
Are they big plans?
They're bigger than big plans. Mm-hmm. They're huge mm-hmm. plans, he says.
That's what we hear.
What are you going to do? What are you going to do? He's going to plan. And he keeps on planning and finally figuring out what his plans are and follows through on those plans. It'll be great. He'll make America into grated cheese in no time. Thanks. Bye. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'm tonight's host. And with me we have two friends who were out in the Dakotas at the site of... Now, who in the world could be offended by a lovely name like Dapple? You know, you think about Dapple, you know, the dappling of paint, the dappling of water. Well, this is a different kind of Dapple. This is Dakota Access Pipeline, where eventually there'll be some oil. If they get it through, eventually there'll be some oil emptying out into a river which provides water for millions of people. So not a very good dappling. But with us we have Diane Haas and Deborah Cohen, and I'm going to let them go to work talking and telling us about what their two experiences were like out there in the Dakotas and how you can help out with the folks that are still out there. Go right ahead.
That's a tall order, just to come right out of the chute and
tell
you about
go.
The experience.
There you go.
I can tell you what got me out there. I was reading about the pipeline. I was reading about the protests. I was reading about the militarized police response to the water protectors who were out there, and it finally got to me, and I thought, I need to go out and see this firsthand and go as a witness and bring firsthand news back. And I posted on Facebook, I said, I'm thinking about making a trip out. Does anybody want to go? And Diane came back with,
And that's all I said was, And within 2 weeks, we were gone. So, never traveling together before.
Right.
So,
although we have been friends for a very long time.
What did you gather from folks on the way there? If you had any conversations with people while you were on your way out there, that you happened to get into a conversation about where you were going and why? Was there any of that?
Yes, and I hadn't actually thought about that in a while. We were at a rest stop on the way out where I mentioned to a woman who I think was doing some sort of security guard duty there, was waiting for Diane, and somehow the conversation came up that that's where we were headed, and her immediate response was, well, thank you very much. So when we did speak with people, it was generally a very positive response, although most of the conversations that I had with folks occurred either before we left or once we got there.
I agree. One time we did speak to somebody, and she was very non-committal, but she was also working at a rest area in North Dakota, in Fargo. And I'm pretty sure she was not going to say what she felt either way, positive or negative.
For concerns maybe that people would be listening?
Or that it just wasn't her job to take a position and deal with the public that way.
That's many of us in life we're that way in life. We're concerned about saying the wrong thing because we don't know if the person we're talking to will be pleased with it, be offended by it. We just really don't know in these conversations with folks that are complete strangers to us.
Right.
So you got there.
We got there.
And there comes the good part.
We got there and found ourselves driving off of a narrow highway onto what was really a dirt road into what looked like, at first glance, a giant festival ground or a giant campground. I do want to let everybody know that Standing Rock is anything but a festival ground. It's a place where serious work is happening, where there is great spirit and purpose. But when you turn down this road lined with the flags of as many native tribes as you can imagine, and you see campers and teepees and cars and small trailers, people putting up whatever kind of shelter they possibly could have brought with them to say, this is where we're staying for the duration, we're home and we have work to do. It was an absolutely fantastic, beautiful place.
Well, no doubt that that even in a very serious setting, you still have to find some comfort and find some diversion, even if it's only a few minutes a day, just to maintain your sense of composure.
Well, I think what happened was that it gave me a new sense of prayer. And it's hard for me to define that word, but people were doing things purposefully. Mm-hmm. Yes, there was laughter, but you could see them doing things purposefully. And I watched two families put up their teepees, and while there was laughter, you could see the intent to put the sticks up, the poles up properly. And it was very, very thought-provoking. And one of the issues at the camp had been some of the people had been there thinking it was going to be a festival. And the reminder daily that it was not a Rainbow Tribes thing. It was definitely, people were there for a purpose.
No Woodstock, no music, no fun.
Well, lots of music,
Yeah.
but not, that was not the purpose of it. I would like to add something about the whole thought of prayer. Excuse me. Before Diane and I even left, we needed a clear vision of what our purpose was for going out there. And what we decided was that we wanted to go and bring back firsthand news. We also wanted to deliver supplies. So we loaded up the car. We had donated supplies. People donated money with which we bought supplies and loaded up the car. There was another possible reason for going out, which I chose not to do, and that was to volunteer to be on the front line for any action. And my reason for making that decision was that I knew before going that the expectation was that actions at Standing Rock were expected to be from the spirit of prayer, from the spirit of kindness and giving and that whole bubble, if you will. And I wasn't sure that I could do it. I wasn't sure that I could.
That's to say, to physically take action, whether it be laying down and letting the police harm you, or harming anyone that attacked the folks that were there.
Right. And I had some real question. Would I be willing to be would I be able to be on the front line and leave my fist in the air, occupy self back at the car and greet whatever happened with prayer? And I was not sure. And I did not volunteer to go to the meetings, to get prepared to do actions. I came home from this particular trip with a whole new understanding of and appreciation for prayer that never would have entered my life previously.
That's the kind of appreciation of prayer that people generally reserve for when they know that they're getting ready to die, and all of a sudden they discover God or find some way to have a conversation with whatever they happen to hold up as any higher authority. But I wanted to mention before we go on that both Diane and Deborah identify themselves as members of Our Revolution. Here is the book written by Bernie Sanders titled Our Revolution. This is the organization that evolved out of the Bernie Sanders campaign, because unlike the other candidate for the Democratic Party who seems to have disappeared post-election, Bernie Sanders has become the voice, not just of the Democratic Party, but of the loyal opposition, the people that love America and want what's right, just, and moral for America, and are going to stand up against the tyranny of the incoming administration. And that's why it's Our Revolution. It's a passive a passive revolution. There's not going to be any firebombing or any. But we're going to stand up for what we believe in, and we're going to stand in the way of anything bad that the powers that are going into Washington choose to visit upon our country that we love very much. Continue.
Well, it's very much in that vein that the folks who are out at Standing Rock are continuing their stand now. Fighting the powers that be, from the pipeline company, from Morton County Sheriff's Department, from the police who are being brought in from 5 other states. So I do see the parallel. We all have something that we need to stand up against and fight for. And they've got something very particular and very, very important to be fighting for.
Let's focus a little bit on the police. Well, I'm not sure if they were police. I'm not sure of where they came from. They didn't wear badges. They didn't identify who they were. What kind of feedback did you get from those people? Were they there because they were hired help, or were they there because they believed that the pipeline should be built? Well, what kind of verbal or nonverbal feedback did you get from those folks?
Well,
did you have contact?
I never had
Nothing more than
contact.
visual.
And it was only by other people having the contact with them. So, but you got the sense, when you started reading and researching it, that they really felt that they were protecting. My feeling about that is you have to be in a mode to protect. And I don't know how somebody can feel that they're a protector if they have more armor on them than they would have when they were fighting in Afghanistan. So they presented themselves as aggressors just by saying that they are supposed to be protectors. And one of the things that really bothers me is how
These are the police we're talking about.
we're talking about the police, but we're also talking about how the protectors are perceived, and the words are used that are used are protesters. And Deborah and I, from the beginning, realized that word is really incendiary.
Yeah, it's
And
yeah.
so the police never, ever referred to the camp as protectors. They're always protesters. And so using that word allowed them to behave in the manner that they did.
They found that as an excuse
I
to
believe so.
misbehave.
Well, it's also the press.
Well,
Any newspaper article, including interviews that were conducted between Diane and myself and a couple of reporters, on 2 occasions we specifically said we would like the protectors in Standing Rock to be referred to as protectors, not protesters. And then some editor somewhere got a hold of it, and in no article that we had anything to do with it were they referred to as protectors. It was always protesters.
And there was the picture of us in the paper
And totally
that it said
misquoted.
we were protesters, and I was livid
Right.
because we made it so clear that that's not what we were doing.
Well, back here in America, back here in the away from the camp, back here in Connecticut, I watch Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman every day, and that was the only news broadcast that not only even mentioned what was going on in the Dakotas at Standing Rock, but she spent generally a good 20 minutes of an hour show on average every day focused on the situation at Standing Rock. Eventually you started to hear a little bit, I mean, when it gets mentioned on something outside of the mainstream media, and by that I mean Fox, CBS, CNN, all of them are mainstream media, and all of them are corporate, and they all stay away from stories like this intentionally. But finally, the pressure became so much that they had to start to at least make a mention of the story and what was going on out there, not by their choice, because their corporate masters don't want them to talk about things that their corporate masters are involved in, which are so horrific as to build a pipeline and they all do. They all ultimately spill. You can't have a pipe without a spill
Oh, I'm
eventually.
counting on this being a disaster at some point in time.
Kristen and I were in Mayflower, Arkansas on one of our honeymoon tours, 2013. No, it's 2015. And we went to Mayflower, Arkansas specifically because there had been an oil spill out there. ExxonMobil had one of the original, what's the pipeline that they've been talking about for a couple of years?
Keystone?
The Keystone. It's one of the original Keystone pipelines that traveled eventually through Mayflower, Arkansas, sprung a leak. There's a lake right next to the neighborhood that had sprung a leak in. No mention ever in the news, but we found out about it by doing a lot of research. We went there, we talked to the mayor's office. They were very helpful. They gave us a lot of good information. They showed us exactly where the neighborhood was that was under about 2 feet of oil, and thankfully they caught it right away. The second in command in Mayflower, not the mayor, but the fire marshal, was away at a conference. He said he got a call. The call said, "Come home now." He said, "Well, I'm at a conference." They said, "Come home now." They immediately were able to stop the leak in the pipeline. The neighborhood was destroyed. It's very gradually, they had to take about 2 feet and rip out 2 feet of the first floor of every single house, then rebuild the house, and little by little they're putting the houses back on the market. But thankfully they were able to stop the oil that sprung out of that pipeline. And that was a little pipeline, it wasn't a big one. It was maybe about, I'm going to say about 2 feet wide. Thankfully they stopped any of that from getting into the lake and ruining the lake. So they were lucky.
Right.
And he admitted it. He said we were lucky. It could have been horrific what happened here.
Well, I'm sure another one that you didn't hear about in the news anywhere was, I believe it was about 150 miles north of Standing Rock, just a little while after Diane and I got home. There was another leak. It was a perfect example of what we can expect to happen if this thing goes under the river. And what I wish people would understand is that we are all downstream from somewhere. All of us get our water, all of us get our clean air, all of us get our food from somewhere else. And when we start mucking about with somebody else's resources and saying, well, it's not going to affect me because I live so far away, ultimately we will pay the price
And
when it hits the fan.
When they're going under a river, it's like having an oil tank buried in your house. It's like having a buried oil tank.
Right.
If that ever leaks, you're not going to know about it for a very long time. It's going to take a while for that oil to sift out and finally a little bit of it to come to the surface. There's going to be an incredible amount of oil to clean up. It's like the Gulf of Mexico, like the Shell, the BP thing in the Gulf of Mexico.
Which is still a disaster.
Which is still a disaster.
And there's two issues involved. One of them is how it ended up going through Standing Rock Reservation, when in reality it should have gone north through Bismarck.
Yep, through a white neighborhood.
And
Did I say white? Yeah, to a white neighborhood.
You're absolutely right.
And then it's not necessary. This particular pipeline is not necessary. There was already in place. It was by freight. That's not the safest way to do it. However, it was in place. By saying that there would be 40 jobs, or this was going to make work, it made work for the workers who built the pipeline, but in the long run, there was going to be 40 jobs. But they displaced 200 that had worked for the railway. So that's a negative gain. That's certainly not a positive gain.
And short term, I imagine, too. Just building the pipeline, you know, they spend 2 years building a pipeline, and then they get the pink slips.
Oh, yeah.
Right,
Did they have a no-fly zone over Standing Rock?
Interesting question.
The reason I'm asking it is because Mayflower, Arkansas, when they sprung their leak, a no-fly zone was declared within, I think, 2 or 3 miles of the site in either direction.
Well,
so the word could not get out.
There are two circumstances which became pretty much a 24/7 expectation for everybody who was camping and living at Standing Rock. Number one were the helicopters and planes from, I believe, Morton County, but certainly from the police side of things, just continuously flying overhead.
With
just
no numbers.
With no numbers, with no
Interesting.
identification.
The police didn't have badges
Right.
on. The helicopters didn't have numbers.
No.
And at night, you know, it's nice to go to sleep in a dark environment. At night, they would flood the campground with light from these giant stadium lights, I don't know what else to call them, that were erected up over a hill that was looking down on camp. So the amount of disrespect and the amount of intimidation continued even when actions were not happening. Flood lamps at night so that people couldn't sleep. Things flying overhead all day long can be somewhat intimidating.
And we haven't
obnoxious at best.
And we haven't even gotten to the fire hoses, the spray, and all the other stuff,
Right.
and the strip searches and
Right.
the other stuff.
Right.
One of the things, too, you have to remember, because it was a no-fly zone. But it was only for the DAPL people that could fly. And so one of the most interesting parts of were the people there that actually flew drones. They got shot out of the sky.
Yeah, that's one way of reporting what's going on.
One of the fellows was...
By having our folks having drones.
Right.
Over.
It was something to see. It was really quite delightful.
One of the handles for it was "Drone to be Wild." So,
Thank you, Steppenwolf.
Going back to the reference that you made about Bismarck and how this was first slated to go through a white town until the people said no. This also has done extreme damage to sacred burial grounds. And that's another big part of this. This is why, you know, the Sioux who are out there are saying, you need to stop. You are coming through our ancient burial grounds and destroying them. And nothing seems to be getting done about that. Had that happened through a churchyard in Bismarck, the news media would have been all over it. So it's truly a double standard. It's a cultural double standard that is beyond imagination.
If our good friend Marty Heiser is skulking around the TV watching it because the show was aired in his town of Ridgefield, I wonder, Marty, what would you think if they were going to build a pipeline through a burial ground where members of your family are buried in the town of Ridgefield, Connecticut? Something to think about. Continue.
Well, that's the major point that I wanted to make, that there were, you know, it's the perceived insignificance of the people who live there, of the culture that is thriving there, by the powers that be, you know, whether it be the military police. I've been taught to say militarized police.
Militarized police, yeah.
Militarized police, or the pipeline company itself. It's total disregard. And in this day and age, we cannot let that stand. So I think people have various reasons for being at Standing Rock. Some are there for the protection of the water. Some of them are there for protection of sacred land. Some of them are there for just protection of social justice. You put them all together, and it's a massive movement that really needs everybody's attention.
Powerful situation that requires a very powerful statement from powerful people. Thank you.
You are welcome.
Some of the conversations, tell us about some of the conversations you had with people at Standing Rock.
Oh my, there were so many. What comes to your mind first?
Mine was with Jen. I was sitting away from a ceremony because I didn't feel like I could be part of the ceremony, and she was from Michigan. And this almost had nothing to do with Standing Rock, but it had to do with human contact. And my son had had a stroke, and her husband had had a stroke, and we were sitting there discussing aphasia. We had a common word, and it was really important.
Tell the folks at the next table what they're listening in. Tell them what aphasia is.
That's the inability to speak or to make sense. My son had had a stroke, so his aphasia was not nearly as severe as her husband's. She had come down from Michigan, stayed for a couple of days, sent her daughter home to get the camper, and she had been there for a long, long time. So you don't have to have DAPL or no DAPL to find commonality at Standing Rock.
And many of the conversations that I had were with people who had been there for a while, and they all seemed to have the same sense of purpose and spirit in camp, and that was such an important thing for me to bring home. It was part of that understanding of prayer as well. They coupled together. They all talked about finding this very comfortable way of going through an entire day's worth of activities really from a spirit of calm, intentional community. So it's pretty neat.
Be nice, and it's nice to try to get some of that in my world, and or to remember to get it into my world during the day.
People forget. A lot of people forget when they think about folks that are agnostics or atheists that just because you don't believe in a higher authority doesn't mean you're not spiritual. We're all spiritual
I agree with
beings.
you.
We all believe in the goodness in humanity. We all look for the goodness in humanity. And 1 minute? 1 minute? Okay. We all look for the goodness in humanity. We're going to come back and we're going to do another show and talk about the goodness in humanity and more discussion about Standing Rock and some of the good and the bad of it, and what we're looking for in the new year with the occupiers and the water protectors that we have out there doing incredible work, including a lot of folks that are veterans that have been out there helping protect the water protectors from the so-called protectors of the Dakota Access Pipeline. It's David Stevenson, Progressive Soup, Diane Haas, and Deborah Cohen, and we're going to come back and we'll see you tomorrow, Thursday at noon 30. Thanks for joining us.